what I'm about to suggest that you do, is something that I have done organically since childhood. As I hear new things, particularly as I hear things repeated at me, I begin to do this work with them. So I'm going to bring up some shared screens here, and I will read as we go through, and there will be assignments. There'll be little pieces of assignment, and it's going to be, I think, great fun. We are going to be talking today about epigrams, which is a pithy saying or remark expressing an idea in a clever and amusing way, and aphorisms, a pithy observation that contains a generally accepted or easily believed idea. We hear these things over and over again in our lives. They are not necessarily true just because they are well phrased. We believe things that are rhymed. We believe things that are brief. We believe things that seem to be common sense. Some epigrams: mankind must put an end to war, or war will put an end to mankind. There's a name for that particular switching of words around to make the point. John Kennedy used it all the time, or one of his speechwriters did. I do not know which. You see it again in ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. If we don't end war, war will end us. I believe that was from George Bush, and I suspect he was at the time trying to sound like Kennedy. It is better to light a candle than curse the darkness is attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. Candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker, comes from Ogden Nash. I mentioned last week or a week or two ago, I love a dry martini to at the very most, free and I'm under the table for him, and I'm under the host, from Dorothy Parker. Writing is easier than you think. Pour scotch into blood, then pour blood into ink. That was me. And love what you do what you love. An unknown epigrammission. Aphorisms, pithy observations that contain a generally accepted or easily believed idea, more dangerous than epigrams if they are used irresponsibly. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The child is father to the man. Everything happens for a reason. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, which has been attributed to many people, including Albert Einstein. Nobody knows the actual origin of that one. One of the most freeing moments of my life was when I realized that I learned from the person who taught me that success comes from leaping from one failure to another with undiminished enthusiasm, which may be Brene Brown, was the same person who told me that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. At which point I realized that she just really likes aphorisms. What is actually Rita Mae Brown, Athena?
She's the one who actually came up with that statement. It's in one of her books. That's
Which one? Which aphorism?
Oh, the one about the insanity thing.
Oh, thank you.
She was the, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Apparently, according to Athena, it was Rita Mae Brown.
I have a question.
Yes, Doug.
Epigram and aphorism are pretty close.
They are, but they are not the same thing.
All right.
And guys, yes, exactly, Doug. This is why I'm doing this. Yes, they are very close, but they are not the same thing. You know, I've been getting back beta response to my new book, Merlin's Mistake. And it's one of the things that people keep saying is your vocabulary is extraordinary. And then when I suggest to people that they might use a specific word, they get angry at me because it's pretty much the same thing. And yes, it's pretty much the same thing, but it's not the same thing. And a butterfly is not a moth, and an epigram is not an aphorism. And I cut out from today the segment I did that on cliches and homilies, which is often used when people mean aphorisms, and a couple of other words that fall into this category. I left them out because I'm trying to make a particular distinction here. This is why vocabulary gets to be so important and why these specifics get to be so important. Not only does the slight difference in words matter in what people take away from what you've written, but the more distinction we make clear to ourselves, the more clearly we can think, because we are better able to find or create the words that are specific to our need and carry the specific meaning. I am reminded of a woman that I met in Holland when I was 11 years old. I remember very little of that trip because I was 11 years old and it was the first time I was in a place where marijuana was legal. I met a woman who was studying English as a second language, intending to teach English as a second language in Holland. And she told me that one of the easy questions that she remembered from the test was to define and differentiate shine, shimmer, glimmer, glitter, and glow. Now, we know what each of those means, and we know that each one is different. And we could pretty easily, if we were asked to, figure out how we differentiate. But as an 11-year-old, it was the first time that I realized that all of those words have very different meanings to me, and that I do need to know what the difference is if I'm starting to think about using words as my primary form of magical manipulation in the world. And I was already deciding that, though I did not know that's what I was deciding. So among the aphorisms, we got, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I thought of that one as I was putting this together because one of the early jokes I had was, I remember my grandfather taught me when I was very young, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it is broke, call a guy. It wasn't a great joke, but I was 17, so what do you want out of me? Everything happens for a reason. I came to mind because Laura Keitlinger, whom I love and whom Doug instinctively dislikes because he once saw her as part of a conservative mob that turned against her. As Laura Keitlinger says, everything happens for a reason. And if you say it enough times in a row late at night to yourself, it starts to sound like anything can happen with a razor. Here is my suggestion. Please list some epigrams that you've heard. Just find some in your mind. I have left the list of example epigrams up on the page. At any time during this exercise, if you find a joke, a response to an epigram, write it down or jot it in your document along with the epigrams you're writing. You may not. Right now, you're just collecting epigrams. We'll find ways to play with them later. But if you come up with anything offhand, just write it down. Get ready to have the fairly obvious next step in this thrown at you. List some aphorisms you've heard. Some aphorisms. Look at your lists. Do you agree with the epigrams? This is a yes or no question. If there are any with which you do not agree, mark that off. Do you agree with the aphorisms? If you do not, highlight them. If you do, leave them as they are. If you do not agree with an aphorism, think about what you believe that opposes it and whether you can say that in a pithy, rhymed, or very clear, brief way. If the original is rhymed, see if you can say it in the same rhyme. If the original has a particular structure, see if you can match that structure. Play with them, find out what you got. And if it's the same format, is there a way that you can alter the words to sound very close to exactly the same, but entirely different? Again, as you do this, if any of you happen to stumble into a joke, feel free to jot that down in its own space. And do not worry whether you are getting it right or wrong. We cannot get things wrong. Those things that we write that do not turn out to be jokes are among the following: ideas that may haunt us and be used elsewhere, sentences that may be used elsewhere, and journal work that never gets used, but gives us the opportunity to put thoughts into words, and words, if we are not driving, to the page, and to play with rhythm and sound and humor and wit and, in fact, intellect, which is at the base of all of it. What if you start one of them and then finish it differently? See what happens. See how many different ends you can find for an oft-used aphorism or epigram. What if you use the end part, but start them differently? It's a more difficult and strange task and won't as often lead to a joke, but gets you playing with them and playing with the words. What if you look at one of them with which you disagree and take it to its logical extreme? Can you alter the words to sound very close to exactly the same, but mean something entirely different? All right, peoples, write some epigrams of your own. Write some aphorisms of your own. What is a thing that you have to say often to explain the simplest of ideas to people, which you now have the opportunity to phrase so that you sound wise? Things that you frequently need to say to people, simple ideas that should be quite obvious, that can be expressed wittily, pithily, in the fewest possible words. If you find any jokes in the process of doing it, feel free to set those aside for future use. Epigrams and aphorisms function in important ways, both to help us write jokes and other materials, because they are, by their very nature, cliche. I will only use them if I am twisting them in some way. They touch upon pre-warned familiar pathways in the brain. They provide an easy opportunity for the break in expectation. You can compensate a lot for a severe lack of joke writing ability utilizing break in expectation. I offer you, for example, from Andrew Dice Clay's abhorrent 1987 act, Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, eating her curds and whey. Along came a spider and sat down beside her and said, "Hey, what's in the bowl, bitch?" It's not witty. It's not particularly illustrative of anything, except his, vulgar willingness to speak harshly in public about imaginary girls that can do him no harm. The fact that he sets an expectation and breaks it delivers one of the most basic forms of laugh response. Take a second. What?
I got a question for you. With you're saying here that it touches upon familiar pathways in the brain.
Yes.
And provides opportunity to break in the expectation.
Yes.
I get what you're saying, but those two things contradict each other if it's traveling a familiar pathway, doesn't it?
Well, first of all,
is that the point?
First of all, you have just spoken the very essence of comedy. Secondly, that is exactly the point. Yes. We are using, when you use them for something other than comedic effect, you can convince people of things because they've heard it before and therefore they believe it's true and they take it as true. The reason I only use them when I break them is that I don't want to reinforce people's willingness to believe what they have always believed. And if I change something they've heard many times in the past, whether it is for comedic effect or not, they are forced to think about it slightly differently. When we start something that is familiar and then break the pattern, we are utilizing the aphorism or the epigram, having created familiar pathways in the brain to our advantage. This is why they are useful to us. When we break the expectation, we have an opportunity to find joke. Also, we can finish out the expectation and respond to the epigram, which we dealt with a little bit earlier. These are just sort of some of the opportunities we have to find the joke in the epigram. An aphorism or an epigram makes a thing seem true. Once you've heard a thing over and over again, you believe it to be true. I recently took something that was said by a famous man years ago, a famous man with whom most people would automatically disagree, that we have all heard so many times that we believe it to be true. And I rewrote the epigram. And I wish you would all retweet and like it, because I felt it was important, if not particularly funny. If you tell a lie long enough and loud enough, eventually people realize you're a long-winded, loud-mouthed liar.
Mhm.
I also wrote recently, Abraham Lincoln. You can fool some of the people all of the time. The GOP, stop right there. That's good enough for us. Any aphorism sets expectation. The breaking of it leads you to the opportunity for humor. Aphorisms and epigrams can be used as opening premise for a bit or as a concluding laugh line at the end of a bit. There was one I attributed to Robert Heinlein once I learned it was a Robert Heinlein line. For most of the time that I used it, it opened the bit. When I first wrote it, it closed a bit. But it ended the bit when I would build with all these things in my relationship, and I would get to, Jesus, if I wanted this, I would be gay. And then PMS is a syndrome that causes. Instead, I put the PMS idea up front, and it got the women on my side before I started talking about the syndrome, and allowed that line to have a bigger, I would be gay line to have a bigger impact when it came, because more of the people in the room understood where I was coming from earlier in the piece. So be aware that when you come up with something pithy, It can be used beginning or end of a bit. Aphorisms and epigrams can be put on bumper stickers and sold at shows, if that's who you want to be. I have never been big on being a merch guy. I feel uncomfortable standing at a table after a show selling witty things that I said on t-shirts or bumper stickers. It doesn't feel like what my work is designed for. If you want to make significantly more money than I ever have, then by all means make bumper stickers and t-shirts with your aphorisms and your epigrams and sell them after your shows.